He came back to the town he had promised never to see again, not because he missed it, but because the silence it left behind had started to sound like guilt. The train slowed through the valley, its whistle echoing over empty fields where nothing ever really changed. He stepped off carrying only a small bag and a question that had followed him for years. Why had no one ever spoken of what happened in that house? He walked the familiar streets where the air felt heavy with memories that didn't belong to him. The townspeople still looked the same, cautious eyes, polite nods, conversations that stopped when he passed. They recognized him not as who he was, but as who he had been, the one who left when things got quiet, too quiet. He found the old house at the edge of town, the one with the broken fence and the curtains that never moved. It looked smaller than he remembered, almost fragile, like a secret trying to hold itself together. He stood at the gate for a long time, wondering if ghosts could hear footsteps. He had been a reporter once, before stories like this stopped paying the bills, before he learned that truth had a price most people couldn't afford. But this story wasn't about money. It was about something he owed someone, maybe himself, maybe the past. He wasn't sure. He pushed the door open, and the smell hit him, a mix of dust and memory, the kind that clings to wood and fabric and time. The furniture hadn't moved. The pictures were still on the walls, faces smiling into a future that never arrived. He ran his fingers across the piano keys, each note dull and flat, like a voice forgotten. He thought of the headlines that never ran, the rumors that died before reaching print, a family undone by silence, a town that chose not to ask. He remembered the girl, the daughter who left without goodbye. He had known her once, not well enough to matter, but enough to remember her eyes, too old for her age. He wondered what became of her, if she too carried the weight of unspoken things. He sat down at the table where once there had been laughter, now only dust. He opened his notebook, the same one he had kept all those years ago, its pages yellowed, but waiting. He wrote a single line. The truth never left. It just waited for someone to listen. He didn't know then that what he was about to find would not be a story, but a confession, written in a language only silence could translate. He closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm here now." As if the house had been waiting for him all along. The house greeted him with the quiet of something that had been listening for too long. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like memory speaking through dust. He moved slowly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. The air hung heavy and stale, but underneath it was something else, something alive. The faint trace of perfume and burnt coffee, the scent of lives paused, not ended. He could almost see them. The family that once filled this space. The mother at the sink, staring out the window. The father pretending to read. The daughter sitting by the stairs, drawing circles on the floor. The ghosts weren't visible, but they were everywhere, etched into the furniture, pressed into the wallpaper, woven into the silence itself. He ran his fingers over the table and found faint scratches, initials. Maybe carved years ago, M&D, side by side, followed by a line that stopped abruptly. He wondered if it had been interrupted, if someone had entered the room too soon. He felt the house watching him, its walls remembering more than they should. He stepped into the living room and saw the photographs, frames slightly tilted from years of neglect. A family frozen in time, eyes smiling but weary. Each picture a clue to a story no one dared to tell. He noticed one missing from the pattern, a square of lighter wallpaper where a frame had hung. He followed the absence like a trail through the house until he reached the hallway upstairs. The door to the master bedroom was half open, the smell stronger now. He hesitated before entering. Inside, everything was too neat, too careful, as if tidiness could hide grief. On the dresser sat a single photograph, unframed, its edges worn, the daughter standing in a field, her face half turned toward the camera, sunlight on her hair, but her expression unreadable. He stared at it for a long time. Something in that image unsettled him. It was the kind of face that remembered everything, even what it shouldn't. He placed it back where he found it and turned toward the mirror. His own reflection looked foreign, older, maybe smaller. He whispered to himself, "They never really left, did they?" The mirror answered only with stillness. Then he heard a faint sound, paper shifting somewhere below. He followed it down to the study. The air was colder there, the curtains drawn. He could see where dust had been disturbed, a pattern of motion leading toward a bookshelf. He ran his hand along the spines until one book felt out of place, newer, smoother. When he pulled it free, something slid from between its pages, a folded envelope, yellowed but intact, sealed with a name he recognized, his own. For a long time, he just stared at the envelope, his name written in small, deliberate handwriting, the kind that belongs to someone afraid of being misunderstood. It wasn't possible, at least not in any ordinary sense. He hadn't spoken to anyone from this town in years, yet the paper felt recent, not old, not ancient, but waiting. He sat at the table, the same one he had touched earlier, the dust still disturbed where his fingers had traced lines of memory. He broke the seal carefully, afraid that any sudden movement might destroy what time had managed to preserve. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, folded once, neat and precise. He hesitated before reading. It was dated 15 years ago, signed only with an initial, M. He unfolded the paper and began. The words were soft but certain, written by someone who had carried too much for too long. She wrote about a house where silence had become a person, where love had turned into duty, where truth had been buried under the need to protect others. She wrote about a man who couldn't speak the truth because he feared what it would take from him, a woman who believed that silence was mercy, and a child who watched everything and said nothing. She wrote that one day someone would have to tell their story, not to clear their names, but to make peace with the ghosts. She said she didn't trust the people here, not the neighbors, not the ones who whispered behind curtains, but she trusted him, the outsider, the one who asked questions when no one else did, the one who left but never forgot. Her words blurred slightly where the ink had bled into the paper. Near the end, the tone shifted, softer, almost like a confession. She wrote, "If you ever come back, look under the piano. The truth is heavy, but it wants to be found." He placed the letter down, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. He knew who M was, the mother. Her face flashed in his mind, the calm voice, the steady smile, the eyes that never fully met his when he interviewed her years ago about something small and forgettable. She had looked at him then the same way people look when they want to speak, but can't. He pushed his chair back and moved to the piano. It stood silent against the wall, its black surface dull under the weak light. He knelt beside it and found a loose panel beneath the keys. The wood gave easily, as if it had been opened before. Inside lay another envelope, smaller, unmarked, and heavier than it looked. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, as if the truth inside it had its own gravity. He sat back at the table, his pulse steady but slow. The air around him had changed. The silence was no longer empty, it was waiting. He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The image was familiar, the family standing together in the yard. The same photograph the daughter must have found years ago, but now he saw it differently. Now he saw what she must have seen, the shadow near the edge. Not just a stranger passing, but something closer. Someone known. The letter beneath the photograph was short, written in the father's hand, the words uneven, like a man writing faster than his courage could keep up. It said, "I did what I had to do. I thought lies could build a shelter, but they only build walls. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her it was love. The truth is yours now." He stared at it, unable to move. The room seemed to tilt around him, the sound of wind pushing against the windows, the faint ticking of the clock behind him, time crawling through confession. He wanted to feel anger, to judge, to label what he had read, but instead he felt only an ache. The kind that comes when you finally understand what people will do for love. He thought about the mother who wrote him the letter, the father who left behind this one, and the daughter who had carried both in silence, each one trying to protect the other and failing in their own way. The truth he held wasn't just theirs, it was everyone's, the town's, the neighbors, the friends who chose not to see. He realized then that the story wasn't about deception. It was about survival, about how silence can feel like mercy until it turns into punishment. He folded the papers back into their envelopes and sat still for a long time, listening to the house breathe. It sounded tired, like something ready to be forgiven. He thought about publishing it, about turning it into what he did best, a story for others to consume. But he couldn't, not this one, because this story wasn't meant to be told. It was meant to be carried. He understood now why she had written to him, not to expose, but to remember. He placed the envelopes back under the piano, as if returning something sacred, and whispered to the empty room. They were just trying to love each other the best way they knew how. He left the next morning before sunrise, the town still half asleep, wrapped in fog and the faint hum of something that never really ended. He didn't say goodbye. There was no one to tell, only ghosts and walls that had already heard enough. The notebook lay open on the seat beside him, pages filled with words he would never publish. Not because they weren't true, but because they were too human, too fragile for headlines. The train tracks hummed beneath him, each vibration a reminder that movement didn't mean escape. He stared out the window, watching the town fade into the horizon, the outline of the house disappearing last, like a secret finally closing its eyes. He thought about the people who had lived there, the woman who wrote to him, the man who left his confession, the daughter who remembered it all. They weren't villains, they were survivors, each of them trying to turn love into safety, and learning too late that safety without truth is just another form of loss. He opened the mother's letter one last time, the ink faint but legible. At the bottom of the page, she had written 3 words he hadn't noticed before. Please forgive him. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into his coat pocket, the weight of it pressing against his heart. He realized forgiveness was the final secret, the one no one could give him but himself. He had come here for a story, but what he found was something closer to surrender, the understanding that truth doesn't always want to be told. Sometimes it just wants to rest, to stop running from the people who tried to bury it. The train slowed at the next station. He could have stepped off, started over, but he didn't. He stayed seated, watching the world slide by through glass that reflected both sky and face. And in that reflection, he saw them all: the family, the silence, the lie, and the love that refused to die. He whispered a small goodbye, not to them, but to the part of himself that once believed truth and peace were the same thing. As the tracks stretched ahead, endless and bright, he finally understood that some stories never need a writer. They only need someone willing to listen. If this story made you feel something, subscribe to The Silent Truth. And tell us in the comments if you've ever known a truth that wasn't yours to tell.